So I recently got a new used car the other day, and it's pretty exciting, but it's also a little weird. See, I've had this 2008 Xterra for years, and I friggin' loved that thing. It was great being able to camp out in the back of it, and really awesome to use the four-wheel drive to access some pretty remote stretches of forest, but anytime I went anywhere, I was pouring hundreds of dollars into gas while simultaneously watching the places I was using the car to access be slowly wrecked through the impacts of anthropogenic climate change, caused by billions of tiny, seemingly insignificant events like driving a car. It's what philosopher Timothy Morton refers to as a hyper-object, or things that exist in our world that are small enough to be present in our everyday, daily lives without being totally conscious of them, yet collectively they have impacts that are far too big for us to understand or even fully comprehend. Now, after all the news with different wildfires and storms and fallout from climate change that's affecting every one of us all over the world, I'm recording this in the middle of a heat wave right now. It's miserable, but I guess that's normal. And also reading some pretty powerful books and reports on the issues, I felt a lot of guilt over the past few months continuing to burn fossil fuels in my daily commuting, and once that Xterra reached a point where repairs to keep it running became too expensive or cumbersome, it had me craving some change. So after much deliberation and long nights researching and weighing all the different options, I ended up getting a plug-in electric vehicle, or a PHEV, and I wanted to take a moment and walk you all through my thought process and justification for it here, because it's been a really tricky and conflicting one at times. This is also a really funny thing for me to talk about, because anyone who knows me knows that I am not a car guy at all. I never really have been, and I never will be. So I ended up getting a 2021 Toyota Rav4 Prime, though I'm not going to be going any of the details of the specific car, the build, the comfort, the grille or headlight shape, the cosmetic features, or any of that trivial, arbitrary stuff that most car fanatics would talk your ears off about for hours. Instead, I'm going to be going through the ethical and moral implications within purchasing a new car that both consumes fossil fuels as gas and has a lithium battery, and that was built relatively recently in an era of climate change. There's lots to unpack here, so buckle up. Oof, that was a terrible pun, but I had to. Firstly, yes, it is a car, a personal transportation vehicle. I bought it used, which I think is a great way to purchase a vehicle, or really anything in this world, as it's already lived a life and purpose to its original owners, and I'm merely extending that, which theoretically means not supporting more production of new things. But it is still a car. This is not a good thing for the future of the world, as a big driver in development, travel, and consumerism is based on the so-called independence of folks being able to get anywhere on their own schedules, which has led to horribly expansive urban sprawl with massive highways, congestion, habitat loss and fragmentation, etc. In the future, we need to be much smarter about development and improve efficiency and affordability of different modes of public transportation, 100%, from light rail to trains to trams, etc. However, society here in North America has been under the fossil fuel industry's thumb for decades now, and a majority of development all across Turtle Island is that highly inefficient, highly arrogant expanse with no efficient public transportation options that basically forces people to exclusively drive cars. And in rural areas like the one I live in, that's the reality. There is no way to get around without a car, so while in the grand scheme of things, having a personal vehicle like this may not be the most responsible thing to do, it's the reality of our present situation as our society transitions and develops to more reliable modes of transportation within our towns and cities. Now, when it comes to a car, this honestly probably wouldn't have been the model that I would have gone for if I weren't considering other options. I would much rather prefer a big truck or SUV to get me up logging roads with all the toys and gear I'd ever need in the back, but this car is going to do fine for most of that. Instead, the thing that really swayed me on this decision was the innovative yet controversial plug-in aspect hybrid of the car. As we find a way to transition away from our dependence on fossil fuels, electric vehicles are on the rise in popularity, yet critics have been really quick to jump on the sourcing of materials and energy that goes into production as a fallacy in this technology, which certainly is valid, and there are many issues here that need to be addressed. However, I found it really interesting how hypocritical this argument can be, especially when used as a way to sway people away from going electric or as a way to justify continued fossil fuel use. See, this technology surely has its faults, most notably the current methods of sourcing materials like lithium to be used in the batteries of these cars, which numerous whistleblowers and investigations have found to be linked to all sorts of poor working conditions for the people mining this lithium, as well as local environmental impacts due to poor regulations and understanding of these mining processes. That's all incredibly incredibly cussed without a doubt and something that needs to be fixed. But to use this as an excuse to continue using fossil fuels is just shallow and a bit hypocritical. I mean, after all, how many people have been enslaved and subjected to poor working conditions as oil and gas industries developed in their early years? How many people around the world are still subject to these conditions in countries with fewer regulations? How many environmental crises or oil spills were created and still are created as a result of these industries operating? How many wars have been fought and people killed, communities destroyed, leaders assassinated in order for certain parties to maintain or gain control of oil? And then how do you weigh the ethical value of all these tiny ignitions of fossil fuels, the hyper-objectivity of gasoline that has resulted in an altered climate that threatens not only the survival of human societies that we live in, but life as we know it on this planet? Yes, electric vehicle production has its downsides, but when compared to the historic and continued impacts of the fossil fuel industry operating as it is, can you really say that EV cars are worse? Doubtful. Secondly, this argument totally fails to take into consideration the impact of technological advancements and how quickly things can change once energy and resources are put into the development of something new. For example, every single graph or prediction for the cost of solar energy that we've ever had since the technology existed has been wrong, with solar evolving rapidly at an exponential rate that makes it cheaper, more efficient, and more affordable than even our best models have ever predicted. At the rate that solar technology is evolving today, it's projected to be the cheapest source of electricity within the next 5 to 10 years, less than half the cost of anything fossil fuel related, and the odds of that happening sooner than we think it will would only continue to follow the trend that solar has set thus far. That is friggin' outstanding and only furthers to point out how ridiculous it is for any government or industry to continue investing in fossil fuel development these days, because not only is it bad for the planet, but it's obviously on its way out as other technologies continue to get better and better. But that's not my point here. My point here is that technology rapidly gets better, cheaper, and easier the more we use it, and that's exactly where electric cars are right now. Sure, lithium batteries have their downsides, but lithium is not exclusive to electric cars, and even since the industry has boomed, there have been massive improvements in technology for things like magnesium or even sodium-based batteries, which are far more abundant and safer minerals here on Earth, which means lower cost and less environmental impact. As those technologies evolve, they too, just like with all technology, will become cheaper and more efficient than we can even predict today. So just because lithium is what we have now doesn't mean that it'll always be that way, but in order for the industry to evolve, people have to get involved and show support of the idea so that technology can follow suit and get better and better without the humanitarian or environmental impacts we currently see. Although it was used, cars like this are still in high demand, so it was decently expensive, more so than I've ever paid for a car before, which was and still is very terrifying. However, after crunching the numbers, the monthly payment that I'm making on a car like this is relatively low when compared to the cost of having something similar that's gas-powered. See, I was spending about $450 a month on average in gas alone on my Xterra, and mileage really hasn't improved all that much in newer similar vehicles, so if I had gone with something similar to that car with four-wheel drive, clearance, and all the capabilities, I'd still be spending a cuss-ton on gas every month in addition to car payments for a newer vehicle, which would cost about the same as how much I was spending on upkeep of a well-used older vehicle. All things considered, the monthly payment for this car here is about the same, if not cheaper, which really isn't that bad of a trade-off. Plus, the ability for me to drive about 70 Ks on electricity before switching to gas hybrid is also really awesome, which basically eliminates my around town gas consumption altogether, only really needing it for longer road trips. You know, I can go surf and come back home without using gas at all, and that honestly is a majority of my transportation consumption, so limiting that is going to be huge. I'm so stoked for that. Then, when we look forward into the next few years as gas prices are surely going to continue to rise, having a hybrid or efficient car makes it more affordable to continue to drive over time, while also securing resale value as gas-exclusive cars continue to be made obsolete as technology advances. And buying a new car is not easy and it can be overwhelming, but even cost-wise, it makes sense going to a plug-in hybrid or even electric vehicle if you can afford it over a gas-exclusive one. Now, the reason I didn't go full electric was partially because of the cost of getting one with all the space and all-wheel drive ability that I need, and partially because of range anxiety. Living in a remote rural community without much EV charging infrastructure at all makes it a bit tricky to get around. However, that too will surely change over time as the industry continues to evolve. Personally, I think the most difficult part for myself has been a cultural one, which sounds kind of ridiculous to say, but I think this is a really common thing with many folks like myself in the outdoor world, and maybe you listening or watching this now. You know, there's this culture of having trucks and big SUVs with all the gear to get you everywhere you may want to go, especially in a province as rugged and expansive as BC. So I've had to wrestle with many feelings of compromise when it came to getting this car. You know, that Xterra was able to get me to some amazing and remote places with high clearance and four-wheel drive, all while carrying all the toys and tools I needed for wherever I was going or whatever I was doing, from bikes to boards and skis, camp gear, tons of heavy camera gear, all the equipment I could ever want. So downsizing, in a sense, to this RAV4 was hard to do. You know, it's smaller, it can't hold as much gear with different all-wheel drive drivetrain and lower clearance. I haven't fully tested it out in all conditions, so I'm really curious to see where these assumed limitations lead me. But then again, do I really need all of that? As much as I venture up logging roads and snowy mountain passes, that's still maybe only 5% of my time in the car. So is continuing to try to live up to and support the toxic masculinity of having a big tricked out truck with fancy toys really worth the hype? Or is upholding that mentality just keeping more people from making the transition to something better? And then even though I bought it used, this car is still relatively new, a 2021, which honestly is weird. I've always had older cars without any bells and whistles, and I rather enjoy that. And despite this being the lowest end model they offer, it still feels way too fancy, almost frivolous in many ways. You know, I want something simple with an efficient, reliable engine and a reasonably comfortable ride. I don't need push to start, rear seat heaters, rain sensors on my window, or any of this added fluff. It's just silly, and it seems to me like too many moving parts, which means more potential for things to break down in the long run as they age, and that's not a very wise way to build things into the future. You know, that was one of the main draws to the Xterra for me. It was rugged, durable, nothing fancy on the inside, just built to perform and be tough. Now, I don't know the breakdown, but I'm assuming a good portion of the price tag of a car like this goes towards all the fancy bells and whistles that car manufacturers have made standard these days. But honestly, speaking as an outdoor consumer demographic here, we don't need it. Cut the fluff, make it simple, make it affordable, make it efficient, and make it last. So, is this my perfect car, or the ideal car for all that I hope to do with it? Heck no, it is far from it. But nothing in this world is perfect. Taking into account all the physical costs I'd be paying for these different vehicles, as well as the hidden costs of impacts on the environment and the places we love through the burning of fossil fuels, it's a great car during this transition we're all in, and I am absolutely stoked to be putting that energy into an industry and direction for the world to make a positive difference. Having said all of that, I also want to say that getting a car like this is a privilege, and it's one that I've had to work really hard for and I'm really stretching to be able to afford. But again, it's about putting energy into a future you believe in, and that's what I'm doing here. So if you've got a gas car and it's running fine and it's affordable, then keep that thing on the road. Drive it for as long as you possibly can. Run it into the ground and get the most life out of it. And then when it's finally at a point where it's too expensive to maintain or to drive, then I'd encourage you to take a hard look at what used electric or plug-in hybrid cars are on the market, or if you're really well off, look into new ones, I suppose, and see if you can help support a societal transition away from fossil fuels, because the reality is that that's happening anyway, and the sooner we can all get on board, then the faster things will be able to evolve to make way for a brighter future for all of us.